Questers, we're back with another Pokemon fan game review, and in this video we're going to be looking at Pokemon Soars. And here's kind of a quick rundown of how we're going to be breaking down this game. So what I judge the games on is pretty much these four simple things, and that is the game's storytelling, the region, the Pokemon in the region, and then finally the gimmick, as well as a few other little thoughts. So, if you want to see me review a Pokemon fan game, make sure to leave it down in the comments below. I'll try to look into it and do my best to get to it next. To start off with, the story. The story of Pokemon Soars was super unique. You actually follow this young boy amidst his parents' divorce, and his parents are actually former leaders of a criminal organization, Sierra, which, I mean, like, the mom is still the bad guy, so you're actually, like, with the dad and his, like, scientist friend, and you just discover that, like, the whole region is in turmoil because of Sierra and their need or their want to use Eclipse Pokemon, which is the game's gimmick. And like I said, it's really unique storytelling. It feels really similar to Pokemon XD and Pokemon Colosseum, where you didn't really get to pick a whole lot of how you started your adventure. In those games, you get handed an Eevee or you get handed an Umbreon and Espeon, and your character already kind of has a name. I think you can technically change it in those games. But in Pokemon Soars, you get handed a Riolu that actually has a pretty cool lore tied to it, and you play as this character named Asher. You don't get to pick if you're a boy or girl or name them like in typical Pokemon games, but it's still pretty cool because it kind of gives you this, like, overarching kind of like ability to see the deeper story. It's not just like vague because they have to like account for if you chose this option, if you chose that option. It's pretty much straightforward, but the storytelling is much more in-depth because of the straightforwardness in the character's customization. And with that, that means that the characters you meet along the way are also a lot more in-depth. And this game did a really good job of actually letting you see characters throughout the entirety of this game. Like, you actually have, like in the Pokemon anime, you have a group of people that follow you around. Like, you have your friend that follows you throughout the entire adventure, and you meet people along the way that you see throughout the entire thing. Because unlike normal games, you're actually participating in the Eclipse tournament. This is very different than gym battles. It's actually very similar to the Pokemon Black and White 2 like battle kind of thing, battle system, where it was like the tier list, or it was the roster list. So you fight in a round tournament where essentially you're going up against the bosses, but no one has a theme, which is very interesting, and they're all bosses and they're all notable people from previous Pokemon games, which is really cool. And they do kind of have a theme to them to some degree, but it's not like your traditional Pokemon gyms. And when you go up against the trainers before the main person, they don't really have a theme to their teams as well. They're kind of like you, where they're just kind of using random Pokemon that are like at a decent power level for whatever round you're at. There's still 8 rounds, much like 8 gym badges, and there's a championship that you will participate in, but it's a really cool twist on the whole gym vibe, and I liked it a lot. If you're really into battling, then this is definitely the fan game for you, because there is so much battling that happens in this game, and it's not like, again, there's no theme to the teams, so it's really cool that you can just, like, actually use the skills and stuff you acquire through battling to go up against opponents you know nothing about. And you know I love a good quest, and this game actually offers side quests that you can do. So some of the NPCs will have a little notification above their head indicating that you can talk to them and participate in one of their side quests. These do not affect the main storyline, so you can do these at your leisure, but they do give you some pretty good rewards, so I would recommend doing them when you can. And honestly, they were a ton of fun to do, and they really help you explore the world. Like, the Pokemon games, a lot of the exploration of them, in all honesty, is a lot of stumbling and fumbling your way through, like, oh, what happens if I go this way? Oh, there's a border. What if I go that way? Oh, there's that. But with the side quest, they actually kind of, like, tell you, like, hey, there might be a side path somewhere, like, hey, be on the lookout for a Squirtle to reunite this Squirtle, or whatever it might be. So it really helps with the exploration of the world without it being just you bumping into walls, because they actually kind of hint at, hey, try finding this item. There's 3 of them within this cave. Can you do it? And you just explore the cave and you find these items, you find other items, you have high rewards for the side quest. Very, very cool, and I love that they don't impact the story at all. So, a huge bonus on that. But I will say it can get a little repetitive with the storytelling. So again, like, your main storyline is you are participating in the Eclipse tournament, but you're also trying to take down your mom's evil organization called Sierra, and the entire time it's you go take down the Sierra people. Oh, you get a call from the battle center. Hey, round 2 is starting. So you go do round 2 of the Eclipse tournament. And then after, you get word Sierra's up to something else, so then you go take down Sierra again. Oh, another call, time to head back and do round 3, and so on and so forth. A lot of back and forth, but I mean, that's with any Pokemon game, it's to be expected, but I think with just how cut and dry, like you go to one location to do the Eclipse tournament, so it's kind of like a lot of, like, it feels like a lot of backtracking, which can get a little repetitive and a little bit just like dull at times once you kind of, like, by the 8th one, you're kind of glad to be done. So luckily, there's only 8, it's not too bad, and the Sierra, taking down the Sierra people, you do get a lot of traversing through the region with that, but yeah, it is interesting, but I don't know, it's just a little repetitive, but not any more repetitive than I guess a regular Pokemon game is. And again, we'll talk about this a little bit later in the video when we talk about the gimmick, but the gimmick of this game is eclipsing, which is like a whole new take on some of the Pokemon, and this game does something I'm not a big fan of. So unless the game has a bunch of fan-made Pokemon in it already, I don't like when they add in a big fan-made Pokemon element. And this one unfortunately did. At the very end of the game, they do have this kind of like legendary Pokemon that you don't really know much about. Like, at least the way I played it, I didn't learn a ton about it, and it just kind of felt like this weird thing to be added in at the end. I was really hoping it might have been like an Eclipse version of Giratina or an Eclipse version of another legendary that maybe makes it act and look a little bit different, but you know, I can't really knock it too much. It's a creative choice, it just wasn't my favorite. I'm sure other people enjoyed it quite a bit. Alright, now we talked about the storyline, let's talk about the region itself. So we are in the Hupest region, that is where this whole story takes place, but it is canon that regions like Sinnoh and Kanto and everywhere else exist. So you're just like this new region within the world of Pokemon, which is pretty cool because, like I said, you run into old characters you met from other games. And the really cool thing about the Hupest region is that it has a very diverse set of biomes. Like, you might start on a route, and as you're going through the story, like, oh, you gotta go find Sierra at this location. So you start going on Route 4, and all of a sudden it leads you to a cave, and then all of a sudden you go back out to a typical route, or maybe you end up on top of a mountain or in a desert. It's really cool to where it's not just like desert over here, forest over here, caves down here, water. Like, it's one of those things of everything flows really, really well together, and that's a huge element for me when building any fan-made region, building any region, even in Pokemon. Like, I think back to Generation 3, and the whole desert being in just one corner of the map didn't really feel realistic to me. This game does a really good job of making it feel like a real world with the diverse biomes that work well together, like within each other. And what that also means is with diverse biomes comes a diverse group of Pokemon. We'll get to more specific Pokemon later on, but it's really cool that you get to see so many cool Pokemon throughout the region. And the one downside, though, I will say, the routes get very long. They are very diverse in their, like, you start in the tall grass, you move to a cave, and then you maybe end up on a mountain or in a desert or more tall grass. But with how that goes, essentially Pokemon, it's base level, it is a dungeon crawler. It's just not your typical dungeons, but essentially you might have to go through like 4 dungeons, 4 biomes, to get to the main goal of what you're trying to get to, which can be a little long-winded. I went through probably the most revives, the most potions I've ever had to use in a game because the routes were just very long, but that does lend itself to giving you very high level Pokemon, which is super, super cool because yeah, it's just nice when you don't have to grind in the grass. There's lots of trainers throughout the region you can battle, but the routes do get a little long, but there is some high payoff in that your Pokemon, you don't have to grind them too much just on wild Pokemon, like I've had to do in previous games. But I think what would have helped with some of this route, like long-windedness, is getting some of the like HMs or some of the ride Pokemon much sooner in the game. It wasn't until about like the 6th like tournament round that I think I got Surf, which has allowed me to be able to go on water, obviously. And it wasn't until I became champion that I was able to even use Fly in the game. So that was something that I think really, really could have been done better. Like I beat the game and I don't have Rock Smash, which is super, super weird because throughout the whole map, you clearly see these elements of like you can break this rock to get a Pokeball, to get an item. But I think what that might be is it might be in the side quest and I just didn't do all the side quest. So it didn't hinder my gameplay at all. And obviously for surfing, I was given that by my dad in the game. And for the soaring feature, I was given that after I became champion by another champion. So it was kind of cool in that sense, but definitely could have used a little bit more of the HM or like the ride feature sooner rather than later. And then finally, for talking about the region, the map is super, super cool. They do this really, honestly, artistic thing where they don't just keep it straight lines. They do a lot of diagonals. They really make it like feel like a realistic map of you're not gonna go and just like a straight line to a right angle and down or up or stuff like that, or up and another right angle. Like it's not just back and forth, up and down, up and down. They do have these cool diagonal patterns and stuff throughout the map where it kind of does look like a natural spider web. But that comes with a big downside of when you're actually trying to traverse the region on a fixed grid where you can only go up, down, left, and right, going in a diagonal can be kind of hard to figure out on where you're actually supposed to go. So I did get lost a couple times throughout the region just because the map would tell me I need to go like northeast. Can't go northeast, I have to go east or north. So that was a little tricky. So if it told you to go at like a diagonal, you could assume it was more so like, okay, go up to the map, you hit a border, and then you go to the left, and that's your diagonal. But it was still pretty cool and really, really creative. Like, again, this game pushes the boundaries on creativity, and I do appreciate that, but it just doesn't always like correlate well with a Game Boy game. Alright y'all, thank you for sticking with me. We are halfway through this game review. All we have left are the Pokemon and the Gimmick, so make sure you subscribe if you haven't so you stay up to date whenever a new game review is released. And if you're liking it so far, let me know what your favorite part is down in the comments, and leave a game review down below. This game was suggested by a quester, so let me know what game you might want to see me review next. Alright, let's get into the Pokemon of the Hupest region. The Pokemon of the Hupest region are honestly really, really cool. They use Pokemon from Generation 1 through 7, which means you get Alolan Pokemon, Kanto Pokemon, you get all the additions during like Gen 4 and all that kind of cool stuff. Like, and the sprites look really, really, really good. Honestly, like, I love the sprites. Like, even the ones they had to make because obviously Gen 7 wasn't this 2D format. They look really, really good. Across the board, the art style and the art direction of this game was very, very good when it came to their Pokemon. It was also really, really cool to see that much like the diverse biomes, there was a diverse population of Pokemon within those biomes. If you were in a desert, you didn't only see ground types. You would see Cacnea, you'd see Cacturne, you'd see Maractus. And same for if you were in a cave. You didn't only find rock Pokemon, you found your typical Zubats, you would find like your dragon type Pokemon and things like that. And what was really, really cool is that this game did not hoard good Pokemon. You were able to find good Pokemon early because most really good Pokemon have pretty mid-beginner stages, but it takes forever to get them to that final Salamence or Hydreigon level because you gotta wait till they're level 55. And if you get it at the very end of the game, you don't want to grind a baby Pokemon all the way up to level 55 when you already have a team of level 55 Pokemon. So that was really, really cool that I was able to like immediately add, it's not a big one, but for me I love it, a Phanpy. Phanpy was like my third Pokemon on the party. I was able to even find shiny Pokemon. I found a shiny Zubat, which turned out to be awesome because Crobat is a fantastic addition to the Zubat line. But that was also really, really cool is that there were so many good Pokemon. Like I mentioned at the beginning, you were given a Riolu at first, so you were also going through the game with this really cool, unique Lucario that had a scarf around its neck because, spoiler at this point, you gave it the scarf. It's a cool piece of lore, and you get to see that like the Pokemon really work well with all the players, with all the people. You see some overworld Pokemon when you're doing side quests, so that's really, really cool. So let's talk about the level scaling. So in most Pokemon games, it's obvious you have to do some grinding, and the level scaling can be very difficult. In some of the games I've reviewed, it goes from like you're battling a level 30 Pokemon to all of a sudden now your rival has a level 50 Pokemon. It can get a little crazy because fan-made games mean fan-made challenges. And this game didn't really have a terrible level scaling problem or anything with that. Luckily, like I said, the routes were very long, but full of trainers, so you had a lot of good experience that you could gain. But there were times when doing the battle tournament where like if I wanted to swap a Pokemon out and I thought it was pretty powerful, the battle tournament, like the whole Eclipse tournament thing really set me straight on this Pokemon is not ready yet because yeah, like one round of the Eclipse tournament, you're maybe going up against level 30, but because then you have to fight a Sierra boss, like the bad guy boss, that's another level increase. So it's a little bit misleading where then the next round of the Eclipse tournament is going to be one level higher, or like one like kind of difficulty level higher than the Sierra boss. So if you were maybe catching level 30 Pokemon, the Sierra boss was maybe level like 35 to 40 was their max, but then you go do the Eclipse tournament and they're doing like, yeah, level 40 is like the base level, but then they start throwing out 50 Pokemon. So it's a little rough, it's a little bit difficult at times, but not like any other game where I had to spend like an entire day just grinding my Pokemon up, which has been a little bit of a thing I've had to do with most fan games, but this one did a really, really good job of actually letting you, if you kept a steady party, you leveled up appropriately and no one was out to get you. And the bosses not having a theme were definitely very, very interesting. So like I said, you battle people throughout the entire franchise of Pokemon. So like you might go up against Rourke or like previous gym leaders like him, which will have their standard teams of rock type Pokemon or whatever their theme was in their game. But a lot of the people you go up against are people like Lucas, Barry, Dawn, and a bunch of other like members from previous games like Silver and things like that, where they don't have a specific theme to their team. They just use Pokemon from their region. So when you go up against them as like a final opponent at the Eclipse tournament, it can get a little tricky when they throw out a Tangela, then a Togekiss, and then they throw out something else that you're not quite prepared for. Like you don't know what's gonna happen, but that also feels very realistic for a Pokemon game in the storytelling element, and it does add a little bit of a difficulty level that the normal Pokemon games don't really offer. And finally, let's talk about the hot topic of this video, the Eclipse Pokemon. So again, eclipsing is the gimmick of this game, which we'll talk about in the next section, but the Eclipse Pokemon, honestly, for the most part, were very, very fantastic. It's very, very interesting to see them. The designs of their sprites would range from very just like, okay, like they added a little bit of aura, changed up the color palette a little bit, to like what seems like a whole new redesign. Like it wasn't, they were just adding additional colors or really giving them like a more menacing look. But I will say the difficulty lies with these Pokemon, you don't really get a good sense of what the Eclipse typing really is all about. So when you go up against Eclipse Pokemon, they're very, very powerful, much like Shadow Pokemon, but it was a little bit difficult because you don't know their moves, they do kind of silly things, it's a whole typing, in addition to they might have a fire typing or a ground typing or a poison typing attached to them from their base form. It gets a little confusing at times, but the sprites were really, really cool. The idea of a eclipsed Pokemon was really, really cool. It worked very similar to Mega Pokemon, where you had to, you can only do it to certain ones. You had to have stones that would do it. Not specific stones for the Pokemon, but just a general Eclipse Shard. but only certain Pokemon could Eclipse. So you couldn't power up your entire team, for example. It was only specific Pokemon that the game said, hey, these can be Eclipsed. And now for probably the most anticipated part, the gimmick. The Eclipse Pokemon and the eclipsing phenomenon of Pokemon Swords. So the eclipsing thing was really, really cool in my opinion. It worked very, very similarly, again, to Shadow Pokemon like in Colosseum and XD Gale of Darkness. But I wish it took more elements from that because like I mentioned in the last section, it got a little difficult to figure out how the Eclipse stuff actually worked. Not only as the gimmick, like mechanics, but just as like from a typing standpoint. Like with Shadow Pokemon, from what I remember of the games, it was they take neutral damage unless a Shadow Pokemon is using a Shadow move on them, then it's super effective. It's their only typing, they don't have anything else attached to them besides being a Shadow Pokemon. All their moves are super effective to normal Pokemon, weak to other Shadow Pokemon or something like that. Again, I don't fully remember, but the game explained it a bit more and it was a bit more like one-to-one. But this game kind of makes eclipsing Pokemon a little bit more difficult than what we might be used to with Shadow Pokemon. They do add new moves, which you have to learn what those moves are. Additionally, they get to have two typings, which I wasn't a big fan of. I didn't like that my Eclipse Pokemon could also be a poison type. Like it would be my Crobat I Eclipsed at the very end of the game. It was a poison Eclipse type, which meant it was weak to all the poison weaknesses, but because it was a Crobat, it eliminated the flying type, replaced it with Eclipse type, and so I didn't really know what I was going to be weak against, what I was going to be strong against, but unfortunately I did it so late in the game, my Crobat didn't learn any Eclipse moves. It just kept its same basic moves that it had throughout the game, and it just didn't have anything kind of unique to it, I guess, in that sense of like, it wasn't all of a sudden learning all these Eclipse moves of like, oh, what do you want me to do? Eclipsing was also a little bit difficult because the character Asher and a couple other characters in the game are Eclipsers, so they have this power to be able to harness these like extremely powerful Pokemon known as Eclipse Pokemon. And so it gets a little bit tricky in that sense because you think it might work like Mega Evolution of, oh, I'm going to eclipse this Pokemon now. But that's not what happens. The game actually has the professor tell you that, oh, bring Eclipse shards to my lab, and you can turn them into the more powerful Eclipse shards that you need in order to eclipse a Pokemon, and that's a permanent change. Once you eclipse a Pokemon, you can't revert it back. But I thought I was under the impression that that meant you had to bring the Pokemon and the Eclipse shards to a machine in her lab to eclipse them there, which became very cumbersome when you don't have Fly, and the Metro system that runs through the whole region doesn't go to your hometown specifically where her lab is. It wasn't until, again, I became like champion of the region, I was like, what's going on? And I click on the Eclipse shard, I click use, and then it opens it up as if it's like an evolving stone of like, oh, what Pokemon do you want to use it on? These don't affect it, this one does, this one doesn't, this one does. And it was really confusing in that sense. I didn't know that I could have been doing that the entire game, that I could have like had an eclipsed Crobat for much longer than the last like little chunk of the story. And it was just kind of difficult in that sense to understand how this mechanic really, really worked. Additionally, you can catch wild Eclipse Pokemon. They are running rampant in certain areas of the region. Don't. I thought that's where I would get my Eclipse Pokemon. I wasted probably 40 Pokeballs with the Eclipse Pokemon having 1 HP. Asleep, 1 HP, Pokeball wouldn't even wiggle. Like, I do not know how you would catch these things, if you're even supposed to. But the Eclipse Pokemon were very, very difficult to catch. Very, very difficult, in my opinion, to kind of use and understand. Luckily, very easy to be able to, like, defeat, because if you went up against an Eclipse Houndoom, it was probably still a fire type, and the dark type was replaced with Eclipse typing. So all the typical weaknesses to fire still took effect, but it would maybe throw out a move at you that would do a ton of damage, and you wouldn't really know what it was because it was an Eclipse move. And if you don't have Eclipse Pokemon on your team, if you didn't know how to Eclipse them, then yeah, you're just not going to have Eclipse Pokemon on your team. But overall, the eclipsing phenomenon was very, very cool. I just think it could have been executed a little bit more simply, where maybe you use the shard on it and it just turns it into a fully eclipsed Pokemon. And then yeah, their weaknesses maybe just like other eclipse types, or maybe it's dark and psychic or something. I don't really know. I guess probably could have been a little bit more like simplified for my taste. But again, all the sprites for the eclipse Pokemon did look super cool. I loved, even though I had a shiny Crobat, I loved eclipsing it because it looked like super, super cool. It looked like Dracula, like exactly what you'd think an evil kind of Pokemon would look like. And so that was very, very cool. I did enjoy that quite a bit. All right, so those are all my main thoughts. And now I'm just gonna give a couple general wrap-ups of what I thought of the game. Overall, the game of Pokemon Swords was a very, very good fan-made game. It's definitely probably in my top 5 of the ones I've played so far. And like, it was really good storytelling. I love this idea that you are the child of a divorced parents that came from this evil organization that was trying to turn the whole world into this eclipsed Pokemon, like, don't want to say paradise because they were trying to destroy everything, but for them, a paradise, like to be able to build this Eclipse Pokemon army. It was cool to see the overworld sprites of some of the Pokemon that were like getting angry at the Eclipse thing. It was really cool to be able to do side quests. It was awesome to be able to like have such unique Pokemon throughout the entire journey. The only downsides was that I wish I got my HM/Ride Pokemon features much earlier. Then at the very, very end of the game, it would have made traveling through the region much, much easier. And I wish the Eclipse kind of phenomenon was a little bit more fleshed out. Maybe I accidentally skipped through it. I'm not quite sure, but I found it a little bit confusing to understand. So if it was a little bit simplified, that would be nice for my taste. But again, overall, Pokemon Swords, very, very fun. Would recommend it if you want a new take on a classic Game Boy game. Thank you all for watching. Remember to like and subscribe to stay up to date on all things Quoorn's Quest so you get notified when new game reviews and new Pokemon challenges happen. Additionally, let me know down in the comments what you thought of Pokemon Swords. Wish you played this game? Do you have a game you want me to play? I do read the comments. I am looking for new game review suggestions, so let me know down below. And again, you can join the Discord and my other social media links that are linked in the description. That's all for this video. I hope you all enjoyed, and until next time, happy questing, y'all.